Hello Year 11. So we're now on to another set of videos to do your GCSE revision. The first 14 videos or so have been all about paper 1, looking at the Germany course. We're now going to do about 5 videos on the Normans, so part of your paper 2. These 5 videos will cover a range of things, and today we're going to start with part 1 of the Normans, which is conquest and control. Part 1 is the focus of what happened when William, Duke of Normandy, decided to invade England. Why did he decide? What was the issue surrounding him deciding to invade England? And then, once he's invaded and is successful in gaining victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, what big changes does he make to the country initially to control rebellions and get control of the country? So let's start off part 1 by first of all thinking about the country that William of Normandy was invading. Anglo-Saxon England. We don't need to know huge amounts about Anglo-Saxon England. There's just a few things that I think you need to take away from this video about who the Anglo-Saxons were. Anglo-Saxon England, you have to think about how it was split up. Anglo-Saxon England was split into 6 areas, almost like 6 counties. We have counties today. 6 areas called earldoms, and they were ran by earls. So those earldoms were different parts of the country, and an earl would control that region of the nation. That gives a lot of power to earls. They are controlling a large chunk of the country, responsible for looking after the country for the king. And that huge power is something that William is going to want to combat and take over when we look later in the video. However, the England split into earldoms. The most powerful earldom is the earldom of Wessex, controlled by the Godwin family, which is where Harold Godwinson comes from. A couple other things to note about Anglo-Saxon England: a very religious society, a Christian country like much of Europe at the time, but religion is probably the most focal point of most people's lives in Anglo-Saxon England. And again, that's something that's important to consider when we look at the changes or what William's going to do as king of the country. We also, as well as being a religious society, is very militaristic. Not many castles in Anglo-Saxon England, and as an army, 2,000 to 3,000 housecarls, trained soldiers, but actually most of the army is made up of peasant farmers who are called upon when needed. Last thing you need to know about Anglo-Saxon England: the population is quite high, about 2 million people, and also you have to consider the resources that are available in England at the time. And everyone, or a lot of people in Europe, know that England has got a wealth of resources potentially available to it to trade with the rest of Europe. So a desirable country, we could say. But let's get on to the juicy bits, the bits we really need to know. So on the 5th of January 1066, there is a crisis. Edward the Confessor, King of England, dies. With his death, you think, well, as the king dies, surely we just get a new one. But the problem is he has no heir to the throne, no son. So we have this succession crisis. Who's going to be the new King of England? In 1066, there are some rules that usually are applied to deciding who the next king of the country will be. One of those could be a male relative. So obviously the ideal situation is you have a son, but if you're a male relative, that could put you in line to be the next king of the country. As well as that, you've got the nomination, so you could be nominated by the previous king. So if Edward the Confessor was able to name you as you are the successor to the throne, you are the person I choose, that puts you in good stead to be the new king. Being nominated on the deathbed, perhaps even bigger prestige. If you are nominated as like a dying wish by the king, that's something that's held in very high regard. You could also be selected by the Witan, which is the group of the most powerful men in the country: bishops, priests, lords, earls. If they control, if they decide, that you will be able to control the country, then perhaps that could be a reason for you being selected as king. And finally, we've got the taking it by force. And if you are a powerful ruler and you're able to gain control of a large military force, that could stand you in good stead as well. So 5 things to think about when we listen to, or we think about who was in line for the throne. And there's 4 candidates. 4 candidates you need to know for your course. Remember those 5 rules I just talked about and whether they match up with those rules. The first one is Edgar Atheling, or Edgar the Outlaw. Edgar was born in Hungary, but the only reason he was born in Hungary is because his dad had been exiled by a previous king, King Canute. So he'd grown up in Hungary, but had been brought back to England by Edward the Confessor, and essentially grew up like an adopted son. And he was seen as quite high regard by Edward the Confessor, but never promised the throne. The great nephew of Edward the Confessor, but never promised the throne. And that's important to remember. And Edgar the Outlaw gets that nickname because of some of his activities later on. Harold Hardrada is the next one we're going to look at. HH, Harold Hardrada. Harold Hardrada, the King of Norway, the Viking king. Very, very powerful ruler, a large military force, someone not to be reckoned with. Harold Hardrada is related to a previous king, King Canute, but not related to Edward the Confessor. But Harold Hardrada knows that he could potentially take the throne by force. And it would be his last big surge of power as he approaches old age. Harold Godwinson is the next person we'll look at, the sub-regulus, the deputy king, the person that's kind of almost in line. If you were to have a football team or a manager, the assistant manager almost of the country. The deputy king, he has a lot of power and control of a large force. Harold Godwinson in charge of a large military force in the country, essentially ruling the day-to-day, or a lot of day-to-day activities within England as the deputy king. A lot of experience and definitely the choice of the Witan. And finally, William of Normandy. William of Normandy, one of the most powerful men in Europe. He's lots of battles have been won by William. He's taken over various areas of Europe, for example Sicily. Somebody, again, not to be reckoned with, a large military force, strong leader of an army, also a distant cousin of Edward the Confessor, and to boot, William of Normandy claims he was told twice by Edward the Confessor that he was next in line for the throne, and also that Harold Godwinson had promised him he could be King of England, or he would support his claim to be King of England. So we have these instances, we have these different claims for the throne, different people have their different strengths, but on the 6th of January, Harold Godwinson is crowned King of England. Now, the reason I'm telling you about those 4 candidates is because actually what you need to know for your exams, you could be asked what's important about the lack of an heir. And you can talk about how these different people had different claims to the throne, and even though Harold Godwinson was the one that was crowned, you have these different claims, which is obviously all these people thought they had different various strengths and reasons why they should be King of England, and that's going to lead to conflict, and it's going to lead to money being spent and people dying, and those things can be points you make in your exam. But as I said, Harold Godwinson is crowned king on the 6th of January. On hearing this news, William is livid, he's really, really angry, and he makes a decision to prepare an invasion of England. That decision is not made lightly, and also it's not a rash decision. William decides that he's going to build up his forces and attack at the opportune moment. He's not going to just get the forces he's got, but he's going to try and gather more support. So he makes some preparations, some very important preparations that you need to jot down, and also remember when we get to the Battle of Hastings later. William makes some really crucial decisions. One of the first things he does is he moves his military, or he sets up camp near the River Somme, about a 20-mile jump across the English Channel to get to England. That short journey means it limits the amount of travel time and limits the amount of risk on travelling across the English Channel. As well as that, he sends his top religious man, Lanfranc, who you'll do about in one of the or learn about in one of the other videos. Lanfranc is sent to Rome to talk to the Pope to get the papal banner and get approval from the Pope that this is a religious crusade, that William's invasion can be supported by God and actually will be making England a more religious place. He gains that papal banner. The papal banner is crucial. The papal banner shows it's got God's support, and that links to something else that William's able to gain: mercenaries. Lots of people in Europe listening to the Pope's word or following the papal banner will act or will sign up for William as part of a religious crusade of England. We also have to think about how William's going to get his troops across the English Channel. He creates flat-bottom boats. That means he can easily transport his cavalry. So all the preparations were done for an ideal invasion of England. And he is preparing, and Harold Godwinson knows. He is expecting it and is waiting in the southeast of England with a large military force ready to face this Norman threat. However, we then have, and William, by the way, is waiting for the wind to change to have the ideal conditions to get across the English Channel, the less risky conditions. And then we have disaster. Harold Hardrada invades the north of England in September 1066. Harold Godwinson is not prepared for this. He is not able to get up to defend against the Vikings in our first crucial battle on the course, the Battle of Fulford Gate. Fulford Gate, near the city of York, is a battle where you don't need to know loads of detail like you would with Hastings, but actually what you do need to remember is that the Northern Earls, Edwin and Morcar, fight against the Vikings and are very brave and put up a hugely amazing fight. They are outnumbered and it's a very bloody battle, and there is huge losses on both sides. Now the Vikings do win. The Vikings win the battle, but at a cost. Like I said, it was a bloody battle. Lots of Vikings died. And if Harold Hardrada wants to invade the country, he knows he's been severely weakened by this battle. He thought it would be an easy victory, but only because of sheer size was there a victory for the Vikings at Fulford Gate. Not long after the Battle of Fulford Gate, we have the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The Battle of Stamford Bridge is almost a surprise battle. The Vikings, after winning the Battle of Fulford Gate, licking their wounds, waiting, potentially they know there's going to be an attack from Harold Godwinson at some point. He's going to respond. He's going to want to protect his country. But they do not expect Harold Godwinson to march 190 miles in 4 days. Imagine that. That's crazy. Harold Godwinson marches his troops, gathering forces as he moves up England to get to the north, to meet the Vikings at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The Vikings are not ready for the Anglo-Saxons. They're not ready for battle. Lots of people aren't wearing their armour, don't have their weapons with them. They're resting on one side of the River Derwent, and the Anglo-Saxons come over the hill ready for battle. Now there's legend, and it could come up in a source, there's legend that a Viking warrior stood on the bridge across the River Derwent, protecting his Viking comrades, and fought off between 70 and 80 Anglo-Saxon soldiers. We don't know whether that's exactly true, it might be exaggerated, it might not have happened at all. Reports are the Viking is killed when some crafty Anglo-Saxons go underneath the bridge that he is defending and stab him in a place which wouldn't be very nice to be stabbed. But, unprepared, the Vikings lose. Harold Hardrada dies. 24 ships returned to Norway, 300 had originally brought troops over to England. It shows you the amount of death in that battle and how the severe losses the Vikings took. Harold Hardrada, their king, dies. Legend has it that Harold Godwinson was very merciful and allowed all the Vikings that surrendered to go back as long as they promised never to invade England again. So those 24 ships could have been even less if Harold Godwinson wasn't as merciful. But disaster for Harold Godwinson. At victory, he's protected his country, he's keeping his job as King of England, and then William invades the south of England at the start of October. So William has to march his troops down to face the Battle of Hastings. The Battle of Hastings, we've all learned about it at school in Year 7, and you know, if you're doing the GCSEs as you're watching this video, we've learned all about the battle, but there's some crucial things we must remember. The big thing to remember for the Battle of Hastings is, why did William win? We know all the different things about the battle, and I'm not going to go into loads of detail about what happened on what part of the day, but we know obviously the battle had its up and downs for both armies. We know that Harold Godwinson, defending the top of Senlac Hill with his shield wall, were in an extremely strong position to defend themselves against the Normans and withhold that for a long time. The Normans don't make a breakthrough for the first few hours of the battle, but then the fake retreat, or the original retreat that wasn't intended to be fake, many people think, actually draws the Anglo-Saxons out of the shield wall, and that's what does it for the Anglo-Saxons. A couple of fake retreats, and Harold Godwinson, by legend, is shot in the eye, and the battle is ended. But like I said to you, the main thing to realise with the Battle of Hastings is, why did William win? And we can put them into categories. Why did William win? So one thing we say is preparation. I spoke to you about preparation earlier. I spoke to you about the flat-bottom boats and getting the papal banner. Those things are really important. William's ready for battle. He's prepared. The papal banner gives his men more hope and gives him more soldiers to fight on his side. So the papal banner is a hugely important preparation point. We also have the fact that William's army is so well trained. There's those mercenaries, and a lot of his army are well-trained knights who have been raised as soldiers. Those people are coming up against the Anglo-Saxons, Harold Godwinson's army, part-time soldiers or farmers. So when we get to the battle, into the battle, and we start looking at some of the big moments in the battle, like the fake retreat, Anglo-Saxons chase them down the hill, probably due to a lack of experience or a lack of skill. And we have to remember that. So William had assembled a strong, skilled, qualified military force. If you're having a Premier League team coming up against a National League team or a League Two team, then that would be a good comparison. We also have the fact that The Normans are well equipped, the types of shields they have, the weapons. They've got cavalry as well, which is going to make them more manoeuvrable. And they have a rest before the battle, landing in England, waiting for Harold Godwinson at Pevensey. William is able to get his men well rested, whereas Harold Godwinson's preparation is marching his men through the whole of the country to get to the battle. Obviously going to play a role. We also have to think of another reason. So we've got preparation, we've got tactics. William used the fake retreat idea. Now the original retreat is when